Nina was 15 years old when she realized that being invisible had its advantages. At Westbrook High School, nobody noticed her. Nobody talked to her. Nobody wondered what she was thinking or feeling. And for a girl who had learned early in life that attention usually meant trouble, this was perfectly fine. She was the kind of student teachers forgot existed until they called attendance. The kind who sat in the back corner of every classroom, head down, notebook open, pen moving quietly across the page. She never raised her hand. She never asked questions. She handed in her work on time, got average grades, and disappeared into the crowd the moment the bell rang. If you had asked any of her classmates to describe her, most of them would have struggled. Brown hair, they might have said. Quiet. Wears old clothes. That was about it. But there was something nobody knew about Nina. Something she kept hidden like a precious secret. Something that lived inside her chest like a second heartbeat. She could play the piano, not just play it. She could make it sing. She could make it cry. She could make it whisper things that words could never say. The story of how she learned was not a happy one, but it was hers. When Nina was 8 years old, her father left. He walked out one Tuesday morning and never came back. No note, no phone call, no explanation. Just an empty closet and a silence that filled their small apartment like smoke. Her mother fell apart for a while. She stayed in bed for weeks, crying into pillows, unable to work or cook or do much of anything. Nina learned to make sandwiches for herself and her younger brother, Danny. She learned to wash clothes in the bathtub because they couldn't afford the laundromat. She learned that sometimes grown-ups break in ways that children have to fix. Eventually, her mother pulled herself together. She found work as a night cleaner at an office building downtown. The pay was terrible, but it was something. They moved into a smaller apartment, a one-bedroom place where Nina and Danny shared a pull-out couch in the living room, while their mother took the bedroom yacht. It was not a happy life, but it was a life. They survived. The piano came into Nina's world by accident. One evening, when she was walking home from school, she passed by the back of a music store. There was a dumpster there, overflowing with broken instruments and old equipment. Most of it was junk. Cracked guitar bodies, tangled cables, torn speaker covers. But sitting on top of the pile, looking almost out of place, was an electronic keyboard. Nina stopped. She stared at it for a long time. She had never touched a piano in her life. She had never taken a music lesson. But something about that keyboard called to her. It was like finding a stray cat on the street and knowing, somehow, that it was meant to be yours. She looked around to make sure nobody was watching. Then she climbed onto a crate, reached into the dumpster, and pulled the keyboard out. It was heavy. It was dirty. It smelled like dust and old coffee. But when she carried it home and plugged it in, it turned on. The keys lit up. Most of them worked. 3 of them were dead. The D above middle C, the F sharp in the upper octave, and one of the low bass notes. But Nina didn't care. She had a piano now. A real piano. And that was more than she had ever dreamed of having. That night, after her mother left for work and Danny fell asleep on his side of the couch, Nina plugged in a pair of old headphones and pressed her first key. The sound went straight into her ears, and something inside. Her chest cracked open. She didn't know what she was doing. She had no teacher. She had no books. She had nothing but her ears and her fingers and a hunger that she couldn't explain. But she started to play. Random notes at first, then patterns, then melodies that came from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere she didn't even know existed. She played for 2 hours that first night. Her fingers hurt. Her eyes burned. But she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt alive. From that day on, the keyboard became her whole world. Every night, after everyone was asleep, she would sit on the floor of the living room with her headphones on and teach herself to play. She watched free videos online at the school library. She studied the way professional pianists moved their hands. She listened to classical music on her phone with the volume turned low, picking apart every note, every chord, every pause. She learned to work around the dead keys. She learned to hear music in her head before her fingers played it. She learned that a piano could say all the things she was too afraid to speak out loud. Years passed. Nina got better. Much better. By the time she was 15, she could play pieces that most beginners couldn't touch. She had started composing her own music too. Small pieces at first. Melodies that came to her in dreams. Harmonies that appeared while she was washing dishes or walking to school. But she never told anyone. Not her mother, who was too tired from work to notice. Not her brother, who was too young to understand. Not her classmates, who didn't know she existed. And certainly not her teachers, who saw nothing in her worth noticing. Nina kept her music locked away like a treasure. It belonged to her and her alone. It was the one thing in her life that nobody could judge, criticize, or take away. At school, she had to take a music theory class. It was a requirement for graduation, so she signed up without thinking much about it. She figured it would be easy. After all, she already knew more about music than most students in the school. But she hadn't counted on the teacher. His name was Mr. Donovan, and he was the kind of man who believed that music was only for certain people. The talented ones. The privileged ones. The ones who came from families that could afford private lessons and expensive instruments. He had been teaching at Westbrook for almost 20 years, and in that time, he had developed a very clear idea of which students were worth his attention and which ones were not. He favored the kids whose parents donated to the school's music program. He praised the ones who already had shiny violins and professional-grade flutes. He gave extra help to the students he believed had real futures. The rest he ignored. Or worse, he reminded them that music was probably not for them. Nina saw this on the very first day of class. She watched the way Mr. Donovan smiled at certain students and looked right through others. She noticed how he made little comments, small jokes that were not really jokes at all. Comments about people not having the ear for music. About some students being better suited to other subjects. About talent being something you were either born with or you weren't. She knew right away that she was not one of his chosen ones. Her second-hand clothes told him everything he needed to know. Her quiet voice confirmed it. Her spot in the back row sealed the deal, but Nina didn't care. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had her keyboard at home, her headphones, her secret hours in the dark. That was enough. Or at least, that was what she told herself. She had no idea that in just a few weeks, Mr. Donovan would try to break her in front of the entire class. She had no idea that he would use her poverty, her silence, and her invisibility against her in the cruelest way possible. And she had no idea that what he did would change her life forever, but not in the way he expected. The music theory class was held in room 204, a cramped space at the end of the second-floor hallway. The walls were covered with faded posters of famous composers. A dusty grand piano sat in the corner, its lid permanently closed. Nobody ever played it. Mr. Donovan said it was for special occasions only. Nina sat in the back row every day, right next to the window. From there, she could see the parking lot and the trees beyond. Sometimes, when the lesson got boring, she would stare outside and compose music in her head. Melodies would float through her mind like clouds drifting across the sky. Mr. Donovan's teaching style was predictable. He would lecture for most of the period, writing notes on the board in his tight, cramped handwriting. He would ask questions, but only to certain students. The ones he liked, the ones he respected. The rest of the class was expected to sit quietly and absorb whatever he chose to share. Nina absorbed more than he realized. She already knew most of what he taught. Chord progressions, timed signatures, the circle of fifths. She had learned all of it on her own, sitting on the floor of her living room with her headphones on and her keyboard in her lap. But she never spoke up. She never corrected him when he made small mistakes. She never raised her hand to answer questions, even when she knew the answers better than anyone else in the room. She stayed invisible. It was safer that way. 4 weeks into the semester, Mr. Donovan announced a project that made Nina's heart skip a beat. He stood at the front of the class with his hands clasped behind his back, a thin smile on his face. He looked pleased with himself, the way he always did when he was about to challenge his students. For the next assignment, he said, each of you will compose an original piece of music. It can be for any instrument. It can be any style. But it must be entirely your own creation. No copying, no borrowing. I want to see what you are capable of producing from scratch. He paused and let his eyes sweep across the room. You will also perform your piece in front of the class. This will count for 30% of your semester grade. A murmur went through the room. Some students looked excited. Others looked terrified. Nina felt something different. She felt a spark. This was her chance. For the first time since she started school, she had an opportunity to show what she could really do. She could compose something beautiful, something that came from the deepest part of her soul, something that would prove she was more than the quiet girl in the back row. That night, Nina went home and sat with her keyboard for hours. She didn't play right away. She just sat there, thinking, feeling, searching inside herself for the right notes. What did she want to say? What did she want people to feel when they heard her music? The answer came slowly, like the sun rising over the horizon. She wanted to say that quiet things could be powerful. That fire didn't always roar and crackle. Sometimes it burned silently, deep underground, waiting for the right moment to rise. She wanted to show that the people the world ignored often carried the most beautiful songs inside them. She called the piece Quiet Fire. She worked on it for 2 weeks. Every night, after her mother left for work and her brother fell asleep, she sat on the floor and shaped her composition note by note. She wrote the music down in a notebook, using the notation she had taught herself from online videos. She practiced until her fingers knew every key without looking. She revised and polished and perfected until the piece felt like a living thing. When she was finished, she knew it was the best thing she had ever created. It was not just music. It was her heart, translated into sound. On the day the assignment was due, Nina walked into room 204 with her notebook in her hands. Her heart was beating fast, but she felt ready. Nervous, yes, but ready. Mr. Donovan collected the written compositions at the beginning of class. He walked through the rows, taking papers from each student, glancing at them briefly before moving on. When he reached Nina, he barely looked at her. He took her notebook, flipped through the pages, and moved on without a word. The performances were scheduled for the following week. But first, Mr. Donovan said he wanted to review some of the compositions with the class. He sat at his desk and began reading through the papers. Most of them he set aside without comment. A few he praised, holding them up for the class to see. Excellent structure, he said about one. Very clean melodic line, he said about another. These belonged to the students he favored, the ones with private lessons and expensive instruments. Then he picked up Nina's notebook. She watched him read the first page. Then the second. His eyebrows rose slightly. His lips pressed together. He flipped to the third page, then back to the first. Nina's stomach tightened. She couldn't read his expression. Was he impressed? Confused? Angry? He looked up. "Miss Reyes," he said, and suddenly the whole class was looking at her. "Could you come up here, please?" Nina's face went hot. She stood slowly and walked to the front of the room. Every step felt like a mile. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her back. She could hear someone whisper something she couldn't quite catch. Mr. Donovan held up her notebook so everyone could see. "Class," he said, "I want to show you something interesting. Miss Reyes has submitted what she calls an original composition. She has titled it Quiet Fire." He said the name with a little laugh, as if it was the silliest thing he had ever heard. Nina stood frozen. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know what he was going to say. "Now," Mr. Donovan continued, "I have been teaching music for almost 20 years. I have seen many students try to write compositions. And I have to say, this is one of the most unusual submissions I have ever received." He turned to Nina with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Reyes, can you explain to the class where you studied composition?" Nina's voice came out small. "I taught myself." "You taught yourself," Mr. Donovan repeated. "And where did you learn to play piano?" "I taught myself that too." A few students laughed. Mr. Donovan nodded slowly, as if she had just confirmed something he already suspected. "I see," he said. "Well, that explains a lot." He turned back to the class and held up her notebook again. "What we have here is a perfect example of what happens when someone tries to compose music without proper training. The structure is unconventional. The chord progressions are strange. The rhythm changes in ways that make no theoretical sense." He looked at Nina with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "This is not how music works, Miss Reyes. Music has rules. It has traditions. You cannot simply throw notes on a page and call it art." Nina felt the room shrinking around her. Her ears were ringing. Her hands were shaking at her sides. "Perhaps," Mr. Donovan said, his voice carrying clearly, "to every corner of the room, you should focus on subjects more suited to your background. Not everyone is meant to create music. There's no shame in that." Someone laughed, then someone else. The sound spread through the classroom like poison. Nina stood at the front of the room, alone, exposed, humiliated. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She wanted to run out of the room and never come back, but she didn't. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood there, looking at Mr. Donovan with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she walked back to her seat, picked up her bag, and sat down. The laughter died down. The class moved on to other things. Mr. Donovan continued his lecture as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Deep inside Nina's chest, in Kong, the place where her music lived, a fire that had always been quiet began to burn hotter. It didn't roar. It didn't crackle. But it grew stronger with every breath she took. Mr. Donovan thought he had put her in her place. He thought he had taught her a lesson about knowing her limits. He had no idea what he had actually done. He had woken something up. That night, Nina did not sleep. She lay on her side of the pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling while her brother breathed softly beside her. The apartment was dark and quiet. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional car passing on the street below. She kept replaying the scene in her head, Mr. Donovan's voice, the laughter, the way everyone had looked at her like she was a fool for even trying. Her chest ached, not from sadness, from something else, something that felt like a clenched fist inside her rib cage. She thought about giving up. She thought about closing her notebook and putting her keyboard away and accepting that Mr. Donovan was right. Maybe music wasn't for people like her. Maybe she had been fooling herself all along. But the more she thought about it, the angrier she got. Who was he to tell her what she could and couldn't do? Who was he to decide that music belonged only to people with money and private lessons and fancy instruments? He didn't know her. He didn't know what she had been through. He didn't know how many nights she had spent teaching herself, note by note. While the rest of the world slept, he didn't know anything about her, and she was going to prove it. Nina got out of bed at 4 in the morning. She moved quietly, careful not to wake Danny. She took her keyboard from its hiding spot behind the couch, plugged in her headphones, and sat on the floor in the darkness. She opened her notebook to the first page of Quiet Fire. Mr. Donovan had called her chord progressions strange. He had said her structure was unconventional. He had told the whole class that her music didn't make sense. Fine. She would make it undeniable. She would make it so good that no one could ever dismiss it again. From that night on, Nina's life changed. She started waking up at 4 every morning to practice before school. 2 hours of scales, exercises, and composition work before the sun even came up. Her fingers moved across the keys in the darkness, building strength and speed and precision. At school, she stopped paying attention to Mr. Donovan's lectures. Instead, she spent the class period writing music in her notebook. New melodies, new harmonies, new ideas that came to her like whispers from somewhere deep inside. During lunch, she snuck into the music room. The grand piano that Mr. Donovan kept locked away for special occasions was always sitting there, silent and unused. Nina had watched the janitor unlock the room one day and noticed where he kept the spare key. It hung on a hook inside the supply closet next to a mop and a bucket. She borrowed the key. Just for an hour each day, the grand piano was nothing like her broken keyboard at home. It was huge and beautiful and perfectly tuned. When she pressed the keys, the sound filled the entire room. It was rich and deep and alive in a way her electronic keyboard could never be. She practiced Quiet Fire on that piano every single day. She learned how the notes sounded on a real instrument. She adjusted her dynamics. She refined her timing. She discovered new textures and colors in her own composition that she had never heard before. She also rewrote the piece again and again and again, 17 times to be exact. Each version was better than the last. She tightened the structure. She deepened the emotional arc. She added layers that surprised even her when she played them. The piece grew and evolved like a living thing, becoming something far more powerful than what she had originally written. She didn't change it because Mr. Donovan was right. She changed it because she wanted it to be perfect. She wanted it to be so beautiful that anyone who heard it would feel something. She wanted it to speak for all the people who had ever been told they weren't good enough. 3 months passed. Nina's grades slipped a little because she was so focused on her music. Her mother noticed and asked if everything was okay. Nina said yes, everything was fine. She was just tired. Her mother was too exhausted from work to push further. Danny noticed that his sister was different. She seemed more serious, more focused. She stayed up later and woke up earlier. She barely talked at dinner. But when he asked her what was going on, she just smiled and said she was working on something important. At school, nothing changed. Mr. Donovan still ignored her. Her classmates still didn't know she existed. She performed her composition for the class assignment, and Mr. Donovan gave her a C-. He said her technique was acceptable, but her composition still lacked proper structure. Nina didn't argue. She didn't complain. She just took her grade and sat back down. She knew something he didn't. One afternoon, while she was practicing in the music room, she noticed a flyer pinned to the bulletin board. It was old and faded, half hidden behind a poster for a school concert that had happened months ago. She pulled it down and read it. It was an announcement for a national young composers competition. The contest was open to students under 18 from anywhere in the country. Participants were asked to submit an original composition of any length and any style. Entries would be judged by a panel of professional musicians, composers, and professors from some of the best. Music schools in the country got first prize was a full scholarship to a summer music conservatory and a performance at Carnegie Hall's Youth Showcase. Nina read those words 3 times. Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in the world. A place where legends had performed. A place she had only ever seen in pictures and videos. Her hands started shaking. The deadline was 2 weeks away. She looked at the flyer for a long time. Part of her said it was crazy. She was just a 15-year-old girl with a broken keyboard and no formal training. She had never competed in anything. She had never even performed for anyone except her empty living room. But another part of her remembered Mr. Donovan's face, his smug smile, his condescending voice. Perhaps you should focus on subjects more suited to your background. She folded the flyer and put it in her pocket. That night, she went home and recorded her composition. She didn't have professional equipment. She didn't have a studio or a microphone, or any of the things that other contestants probably had. She just had her keyboard, her headphones, and a free recording app on her phone. She played Quiet Fire, straight through, one take, no mistakes. When she finished, she listened to the recording. It wasn't perfect quality. There was a little static in the background. The audio was slightly uneven in places, but the music was there. Every note, every emotion, every ounce of her soul that she had poured into this piece. She filled out the entry form online. It asked for her name and school and contact information. But when she got to the part about how her submission would be listed, she saw an option. Anonymous entry. Contestants could choose to have their entries judged without their names attached. The judges would hear only the music. They would know nothing about who composed it. No name, no school, no background. Just the notes on the page and the sound in the recording. Nina checked the box. She didn't want special treatment. She didn't want sympathy. She didn't want anyone to judge her music based on who she was or where she came from. She wanted her music to speak for itself. She submitted the entry at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline. Then she closed her laptop, lay down on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. She didn't tell anyone what she had done. Not her mother. Not her brother. Not a single person at school. This was between her and the music now. Whatever happened next, she had done everything she could. She had taken her pain and her anger and her dreams and turned them into something real. Something that existed in the world now, flying toward a panel of judges who had no idea who she was. She closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she slept peacefully. 8 weeks passed. Nina tried not to think about the competition. She went to school. She did her homework. She practiced her piano every night. She lived her life as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't sent a piece of her soul out into the world and left it in the hands of strangers. But every day, when she came home from school, she checked the mailbox. And every day, there was nothing. She started to accept that she probably hadn't won. There were thousands of entries, she told herself. Kids from all over the country. Kids with real training and real teachers and real instruments. Kids who had been playing since they were 5 years old, who had parents that drove them to lessons and recitals and competitions. What chance did she have against all of that? She told herself it was fine. She told herself that the competition didn't matter. She had proven something to herself, and that was enough. She had taken everything Mr. Donovan said and turned it into fuel. She had become better than she ever thought possible. Even if nobody else ever knew it, she knew it. And that had to be enough. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, Nina came home to find a letter sitting on the kitchen counter. Her mother had left it there with a note. "This came for you. Looks official. Everything okay?" Nina picked up the envelope. It was thick and white and heavy. The return address said National Young Composers Foundation. Her name was printed neatly on the front. Her hands started trembling. She stood in the kitchen for a long time, just holding the envelope. She was afraid to open it. As long as it stayed sealed, she could still hope. She could still imagine. But the moment she opened it, the dream would either become real or disappear forever. She took a deep breath. She tore open the envelope. Inside, there was a letter. 3 pages, printed on heavy paper with an official letterhead. She unfolded them slowly, her eyes scanning the words. "Dear Composer, we are pleased to inform you, out of over 4,000 entries, unanimous decision by our panel of judges." Nina's vision blurred. She blinked hard and kept reading. "Your composition, Quiet Fire, has been selected as the first-place winner of this year's National Young Composers Competition." She read the sentence 3 times. Then she read it again. First place. She had won. Her legs gave out. She sat down hard on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, the letter clutched in her shaking hands. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she wasn't sad. She wasn't even happy, exactly. It was something bigger than that. Something she didn't have words for. All those nights on the floor of her living room. All those hours with her broken keyboard and her headphones. All those mornings when she woke up before dawn to practice. All those times she had been ignored, overlooked, laughed at, dismissed. It had all led to this moment. She kept reading. The letter explained that she had won a full scholarship to the Summer Music Conservatory. Travel and lodging would be covered. And in 2 months, she would perform her winning composition at Carnegie Hall's annual youth showcase. Carnegie Hall. The words looked impossible on the page. Like something from a dream she wasn't allowed to have. There was more. The foundation had contacted her school to arrange a celebration. They wanted to honor her achievement. They wanted to share her story. Nina didn't know what that meant. She didn't care. All she could think about was the music. Her music. The thing she had created in the darkness, alone, with no one believing in her. It had been heard. 2 weeks later, Nina walked into school to find everything different. There were posters in the hallway with her name on them. Students she had never spoken to smiled at her and said congratulations. Teachers she barely recognized stopped her in the corridor to shake her hand. The principal had organized a special assembly. Local news reporters were there with cameras. The whole school was going to watch Nina perform her winning composition live. She felt like she was walking through someone else's life. The assembly was held in the gymnasium. 500 students sat in rows of folding chairs. Teachers lined the walls. Parents who had taken time off work filled the back section. A grand piano had been moved onto the small stage at the front. Nina stood backstage, peeking through the curtain. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Then she saw him. Mr. Donovan. He was standing near the stage, wearing a suit and tie she had never seen before. He was talking to the principal, nodding seriously, looking important. He had a piece of paper in his hand. A few minutes later, the principal stepped up to the microphone and welcomed everyone. He talked about excellence and achievement and the pride of Westbrook High. Then he introduced Mr. Donovan as the head of the music department. Mr. Donovan walked onto the stage with a smile. He stood behind the microphone and looked out at the crowd like a man who was exactly where he belonged. "Thank you all for being here today," he said. "As the music teacher at this school for nearly 20 years, I have had the privilege of watching many talented young people discover their passion for music." Nina listened from behind the curtain. Her jaw tightened. Today, we celebrate one of our own, Mr. Donovan continued. A student who has shown extraordinary talent and dedication. A student who represents the very best of what this school has to offer. He paused for effect. Please join me in welcoming our national competition winner, Miss Nia Reyes. The gymnasium erupted in applause. Nina took a deep breath, pushed through the curtain, and walked onto the stage. The lights were bright. The faces in the crowd blurred together. She could see cameras pointed at her, red lights blinking. She could hear people cheering, but she blocked it all out. She walked past Mr. Donovan without looking at him. She didn't shake his hand. She didn't smile at him. She just walked straight to the piano and sat down on the bench. The room fell silent. Nina placed her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought about everything that had brought her here. The dumpster behind the music store. The broken keyboard. The nights alone in the dark. The laughter of her classmates. The smug voice of the man standing a few feet away. Then she began to play. First notes of Quiet Fire floated out into the gymnasium, soft, gentle, like the first flicker of a flame that no one notices. And the music grew. It built slowly, layer by layer, like something waking up from a long sleep. The melody rose and fell, carrying emotions that words could never capture. Pain, hope, anger, determination, love. Nina played with her whole body. Her fingers danced across the keys. Her shoulders swayed with the rhythm. Her face showed every feeling the music contained. The audience sat frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Nobody looked at their phones. They just listened. The piece built toward its climax. The notes came faster, stronger, more intense. The music filled every corner of the gymnasium, bouncing off the walls, vibrating in people's chests. Then, at the very peak, everything stopped. One single note hung in the air. Pure and clear and heartbreaking note. Then silence. Nina lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was completely still. Then someone in the front row stood up and started clapping. Then another person. Then another. Within seconds, the entire gymnasium was on its feet, applauding and cheering. Nina stood up slowly and turned to face the crowd. She felt tears on her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She looked over at Mr. Donovan. He was still standing near the stage, exactly where he had been before. But his smile was gone. His face was pale. His eyes were fixed on Nina, but he couldn't hold her gaze. He looked away. Nina didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The music had said it all. The summer conservatory changed everything. For 6 weeks, Nina lived in a world she never knew existed. She stayed in a dormitory with other young musicians from around the country. She took classes from professors who had performed at the greatest concert halls in the world. She practiced on pianos that cost more than her mother made in 10 years. But the thing that changed her most was not the fancy equipment or the famous teachers. It was being surrounded by people who understood her. For the first time in her life, Nina was not invisible. She was not the quiet girl in the back row. She was a composer, a musician, someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered. The other students asked her about her music. They wanted to know how she came up with her melodies. They wanted to understand how someone with no formal training had created something that moved professional judges to tears. Nina didn't know how to answer at first. She had never talked about her music with anyone before. But slowly she opened up. She told them about the keyboard in the dumpster. She told them about the nights alone in her living room. She told them about the teacher who tried to break her. They listened. They understood. Some of them had similar stories. Not all of them, but enough. She realized something important that summer. Talent doesn't care about money. It doesn't care about background. It doesn't care about what school you go to or who your parents are. Talent is a fire that burns inside certain people, and all it needs is a chance to breathe. The Carnegie Hall performance came at the end of the summer. Nina had never been to New York City before. She had never seen buildings so tall or streets so crowded. She had never felt so small and so alive at the same time. The morning of the concert, she stood outside Carnegie Hall and looked up at the building. It was old and beautiful, made of brown brick and white stone. Famous composers had walked through those doors. Legends had stood on that stage. And tonight she would stand there too. Her mother had come. She had taken 3 days off work, unpaid, to be there. It was the first vacation she had taken in years. She sat in the audience wearing her best dress, the one she only wore to church on Easter. Danny was there too. He was 11 now, old enough to understand what was happening. He sat next to their mother, fidgeting with excitement, unable to believe that his quiet sister was about to perform at one of the most famous places in the world. When Nina walked onto the stage that night, the audience fell silent. The concert hall was nothing like the gymnasium at Westbrook High. It was vast and elegant, with red velvet seats and golden balconies that rose up toward a painted ceiling. The acoustics were perfect. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat seemed to hang in the air. Nina sat down at the grand piano. It was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen. Black and shining, with keys that felt like silk under her fingers. She looked out at the audience. Hundreds of faces looked back at her. She couldn't see her mother or her brother in the darkness, but she knew they were out there, watching, believing. She took a breath, and she played. Quiet Fire filled Carnegie Hall like it had never filled any space before. The notes rose up to the ceiling and floated back down like falling stars. The melody wrapped around every person in the audience and held them tight. Nina played better than she had ever played in her life. Every note was perfect. Every emotion was real. She wasn't performing anymore. She was speaking. She was telling her story through the music. The quiet girl nobody noticed. The broken keyboard in the dark. The teacher who laughed at her dreams. The nights when she almost gave up. The morning she decided to keep fighting. It was all there, in the music. When she played the final note, she let it ring out into the silence. Then she lifted her hands and placed them in her lap. The audience erupted. People stood up before the sound had even faded. They clapped and cheered and shouted. Some of them were crying. Nina saw a woman in the front row, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. She saw an old man with white hair, nodding his head slowly, like he had just witnessed something important. She stood up and bowed. The applause went on and on. It felt like it would never stop. When she finally walked off the stage, her mother was waiting in the wings. She grabbed Nina and held her so tight that Nina could barely breathe. "I'm so proud of you," her mother whispered. "I'm so proud of you, baby." Nina hugged her back. For the first time in years, she let herself cry in front of someone. Danny was there too, jumping up and down. "That was so cool," he kept saying. "That was so cool." Nina laughed and ruffled his hair. "Thanks, kid." That night changed the course of Nina's life. The performance was written about in newspapers and music magazines. Agents reached out to her. Schools offered her scholarships. Doors that had always been closed suddenly swung wide open. She finished high school and went to one of the best music colleges in the country on a full scholarship. She studied composition and piano performance. She learned things she never could have learned on her own, but she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the broken keyboard or the cold apartment or the nights when music was the only thing keeping her alive. At 23, she released her first album. Critics called it stunning. They said her music spoke to something deep in the human experience. They said she had a gift for turning pain into beauty. She composed scores for films. She performed at concert halls around the world. She won awards she never dreamed of winning. And in every interview, when people asked about her inspiration, she gave the same answer. Someone told me once that I wasn't good enough, she would say. He told me that music wasn't for people like me, that I should stick to subjects more suited to my background. She would pause and smile. I decided to spend the rest of my life proving that talent doesn't care about where you come from. It doesn't care about your clothes or your address or how much money your parents have. Talent is a fire, and some people have it burning inside them whether the world sees it or not. She never said Mr. Donovan's name. She didn't need to. As for Mr. Donovan himself, he retired from Westbrook High 2 years after Nina left. He never spoke about her publicly. He never gave interviews about being her teacher. He faded quietly into the background, just another name in the school's history. But people who knew him said something interesting. They said he kept a newspaper clipping in his desk drawer, a clipping from the day after Nina's Carnegie Hall debut. The headline read, "Self-taught teen stuns Carnegie Hall with original composition." He never showed it to anyone. He never talked about it. But he kept it. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was regret. Maybe, in some small way, he finally understood what he had almost destroyed. Or maybe he just wanted to remember the girl he had underestimated. The girl who sat in the back row of his classroom, invisible, unnoticed, burning with a fire he was too blind to see. Some lessons, it turns out, are not taught by teachers. Some lessons are taught by the students. And some fires, no matter how quiet they burn, can never be put out.